We have to be tough, and we have to be safe, and we have to be secure. At a minimum, we have to make sure that we vet people coming into the country. We know who's coming in. The ruling shows that all of the attacks from the media and the Democrat politicians are wrong, and they turned out to be very wrong. And what we're looking for as Republicans, I can tell you, is strong borders, no crime.
Well, it was the narrowest of margins, but the United States Supreme Court upheld Donald Trump's travel ban against mostly Muslim countries. The 5-4 decision was greeted by the president with a big wow on Twitter as he savored a major victory in his drive to choke down on certain types of immigration. For reaction, let's go to Washington to connect with Carolyn Homer. She's a trial lawyer with the Council on American-Muslim Relations. Carolyn, what do you believe this means for Muslims in America and abroad?
What this means for Muslims in America is that the Trump administration's attitude of discriminating against them and of refusing to let them be recognized as full American citizens is working. Is based on the logic of the Supreme Court's ruling, nothing stops President Trump from adding additional countries to this ban in the future and of continuing to impose restrictions on the immigration of family members and Sikh Muslims who are, and researchers and professors who are trying to get into the United States.
You do represent an organization that talks about American-Muslim relations. What does this do to those relations inside the United States, do you think?
Well, in the United States, I think that this is a call to greater activism. We have challenges to this lawsuit that are proceeding in the lower courts, and they will continue in the lower courts, because the Supreme Court's decision here was not the last word. It did remand back for further fact-finding about Donald Trump's bias and the reasons that underlie this order. And so now what really matters is calling our congressmen and making sure that in November officials are elected who have the power to change laws to revoke this power from the President of the United States to ban Muslims and individuals from Muslim-majority countries.
Well, help me understand this. It's a different legal system up here. Doesn't the Supreme Court mean that's it? That's the last word on this? How do lower court rulings change what's happened today in the Supreme Court?
So the United States system, there can be a final court decision at the end of a trial, or there can be a preliminary decision, what's known as a preliminary injunction. And what that means is that lower courts determine that based on early evidence, a case is so likely to win that they are going to prohibit activities here, the barring of entry from Muslims from these Muslim-majority countries, pending the full trial. And so what the Supreme Court was hearing was actually a preliminary appeal of a preliminary order. It was not hearing the final order. Now, the Supreme Court's reasoning will affect lower cases going forward, but it did leave some avenues for exploration that could still result on remand, as we call it, when it goes back to the trial court. There's still way forward to hold that Trump acted with anti-Muslim bias.
I'm curious what this, you alluded a bit to this earlier, but does this ruling, in your view, give the president even greater, if not unlimited, powers to block other religions? I mean, so he's out for Mexicans as well. Does this give him any new power in the fight against, say, Mexican immigration?
Absolutely it does. So what the Supreme Court said is that the President of the United States has been granted extremely broad discretion and authority by Congress and by our immigration laws to block entry of any class of individuals he feels it is in the national interest to block. And so Trump actually could use this order as precedent to continue what we've seen in the news for the last week, which is blocking the entry of individuals on the United States southern border from Latin American countries as well.
So what do you think happens now? I mean, do we see a lot of pushback from minority groups in the states? Do we see a lot of immigration dropping off from countries that aren't on the banned list, that may find themselves feeling pretty uncomfortable about the idea of going to the States? What do you think is going to be the long-term effect of this decision?
Well, in the short term, there are protests and rallies being held by enormous coalitions of groups all over America today and through the rest of this week. And in the medium term, this will be used to drive out, get the vote efforts in November, which is when our elections for Congress and the Senate will happen. But in the long term, it means that fewer immigrants from these Muslim-majority countries are going to be able to come here. Justice Breyer, in his dissent from this decision today, noted that there are a lot of reasons to think that even though there's a waiver process in place where individuals from Muslim-majority countries can get into the United States, those aren't really working.
All right. I'm sorry, I'm out of time, Carolyn. Appreciate your insight on this very interesting decision. Appreciate your help.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.